California seems to have become unable to solve basic problems. Each year we see budgets fall apart, services decline, and we wonder why. Today, we will hear from Californians who, like you, are concerned about that and about how we can fix our ailing state government. Hello, my name is Fred Keeley. I'm a member of the Leadership Council of California Forward. California Forward is an organization that was founded a few years ago to try to get to the root problems of why California's government is dysfunctional, why we can't get budgets on time, why it is when we get a budget it's not worth having waited for it, why our schools are in decline, why we can't really get the basics of California's service system delivered to the people of California. California Forward came together when a group of large foundations who do great work in California came to the same conclusion. They wondered why it was their partner, called state government, was really losing its footing, not able to do good work in health and human services, affordable housing, environmental protection, and a whole range of other important public policy arenas in California. Those foundations came together and in an unprecedented way decided to fund California Forward to help seek solutions to our governance problems. California Forward is led by a leadership council consisting of prominent Californians from Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, Vegetarians from all walks of life. What we share in common is a desire to repair the broken government of California. That's allowed us to have a spirited, healthy, diverse conversation and to look around not only California, but look around the nation for what are the best practices to help solve our problems of governance in this wonderful state. Like you, there are in fact millions of Californians who are very concerned about our failure to really get things right and get very much accomplished. Let's hear from some of those other concerned Californians now.
It is also clear that in a state as large as California, that the proposition process has been taken over by people who have a lot of money and who can bring issues to the voters again and again when they're not getting their way in the legislature. I think that we need to do two things. One is that we need to fix our legislature so that it's more functional and it really does represent more of the population so that people don't feel like they have to resort to propositions to get their ideas heard. But the other thing is I think we need to rethink, how we allow propositions to get onto the ballot.
The part that is concerning me in particular right now is the appearance when I come to Sacramento and other places that I've gone to recently where it's become normal for there to be no budget. That this is the 6 out of 7 years in a row that there has been no budget. Yet the Constitution of the state of California very clearly says July 1st, a budget.
There's different ways for normal individual Californians to be at the table. For example, for myself, being the executive director of the Health Professions Education Foundation, I am making statewide policies. I'm not a legislator, I'm not the governor, I wasn't elected, but in essence, as the executive director of a public entity, I am responsible for ensuring not only the fiscal soundness, but I am responsible for ensuring that the right people get the right educational support in order to live out their dreams.
And so the same chemistry that is affecting Washington is affecting California and how we govern in California, and all of the things that I was raised with as a boy that made California special, that made California something that was on the cutting edge of the future, literally has been jeopardized by the dysfunctionality of what's happening in Sacramento. And it's for that reason that I've gotten involved with issues to try to see if there's a way to improve governing in Sacramento. I continue to stay involved on Washington issues as well, but it's all for the same reasons, that we have got to find a way to try to make government work again.
Thank you, Leon. 100 years ago in California, we were facing a very, very similar situation to what we face today. 100 years ago in 1911, what was going on is this. 4 unelected, unaccountable people ran the state of California. They were the 4 railroad barons who controlled our state. Every decision of every governor, every decision of the legislature, every decision of local officials, they made those decisions. And that was really antithetical to the way we as Californians and we as Americans believe we ought to be governed. We believe that the people of the state of California ought to be in charge, and that we lend power to our elected officials to help us do that. 100 years ago, Hiram Johnson and the progressive movement came along, and their answer to a government that wasn't working, to a government that didn't resolve issues that the people needed to resolve, was to create the initiative, the referendum, and the recall. And those tools empowered the people of the state of California. Like then, we must now face and overcome a series of challenges in 2011, 100 years after we did it the first time. Today, what we need to do is really look and repair our budget process. We need to look at and repair parts of our electoral process so that we can end up with tools that are accessible to the people of California to be able to really solve our problems. Together, we can do that. California Forward, together with other wonderful organizations like Common Cause, AARP, the League of Women Voters, and other organizations, have come together to fight the special interests in Sacramento and be able to bring about some real reform of governance in California. Let's hear more from Kathy, Joel, and Lupe on these subjects.
I think that when propositions were first conceived, the real idea was that there are a small number of issues that are best decided by the voters directly, because legislators couldn't make those decisions because they had a direct conflict of interest. So with Proposition 11, we're fundamentally trying to change the way that districts are drawn, and we're taking power from the legislators. That's not one where they voluntarily would have passed a bill to do. Okay. On the other hand, I think that it is also clear that in a state as large as California, that the proposition process has been taken over by people who have a lot of money and who can bring issues to the voters again and again when they're not getting their way in the legislature. I think that we need to do 2 things. One is that we need to fix our legislature so that it's more functional and it really does represent more of the population, so that people don't feel like they have to resort to propositions to get their ideas heard. But the other thing is, I think we need to rethink, how we allow propositions to get onto the ballot. There does need to be a process where propositions go through some public discussion, where people are better educated about them, where it's not just a money game, but it's actually something where by stimulating a conversation, people are informed and can make an informed choice about whether they want it on the ballot or not, and then also, whether they want to vote for it or not. I think right now, because we have this huge high threshold of 600 to 700,000 signatures that need to be gathered, it basically comes down to, do you have $1 million or $2 million to gather the signatures? And then do you have $5 to $10 million to buy campaign ads on television? And that formula is one that I think has really challenged the usefulness and the representativeness of the initiative process. One small example of how when people are disenfranchised and they're not allowed to vote, they're really denied services. The community of Watts, it's not a very large community, mixed between predominantly Latino and African American, and it's middle income, lower middle income. They are cut into 3 different Senate districts. So what happens is that when they have a big problem, small example, in 2003 there was this freak hailstorm that came through and flooded out dozens of houses to the point where, it's a mini New Orleans where, the community literally had to rebuild from scratch. And a lot of people had to move out of their houses and were looking for emergency support and emergency housing. And when they went looking to their state senators for some help, the state senators said, well, you know what? There's only a couple hundred in my district. And then they would go next door to the next senator because their community was cut into 3 pieces, and that senator would say, oh, you only have a couple hundred in my district. And each time they would get ping-ponged between one district and another, because not only did those state senators know how many people were in their district from that community, they also knew that this community didn't vote in as high numbers as other neighborhoods did. And so in their minds, the calculus was, do I need to pay attention? Well, there's not a big political downside to letting this problem slide and focusing on other communities where there's high voter turnout. And so what happened was that the community of Watts went for a very long time without federal assistance, without state assistance, and it took a lot of community mobilization just to get some attention for something that I think across the board everybody said, was a very dire emergency and really needed to have an immediate response.
Thank you, Kathy. As residents of the Central Coast know, in 2001, we got really badly treated by the redistricting done by the California legislature. What used to be a Senate district that resided really in Santa Cruz and Monterey counties was split up and divided into 3 Senate districts, one up in the San Francisco Peninsula, one over in the San Joaquin Valley, and one down in Santa Barbara County. Now we're sort of like the tail on 3 separate dogs. However, in 2008, voters throughout the state of California, who were very unhappy with the inherent conflict of interest of legislators drawing their own lines, got together and wrote Proposition 11. We passed that ballot measure. It took redistricting out of the hands of the legislature, put it into the hands of an independent redistricting commission. In 2010, we, the voters of California, added to that. We added the drawing the district lines for Congress. We also beat back a proposal by special interests, which would undone all of that. So now what we've got is an independent citizens redistricting commission that can fight for the interest of Californians, not for special interests. And you know what the good news is? You can participate in the drawing of those new Assembly and Senate and congressional district lines. You can go to wedrawthelines.ca.gov and actually help draw new district lines. That's one of the achievements of California Forward, together with our partners, Common Cause, the League of Women Voters, AARP, and other good government folks throughout the state. Now, let's hear more from Joel about the failed state budget process.
Community health centers right now serve over 3.5, almost 4 million people for primary care services. There's only one system that serves more patients than ours, and that's Kaiser Permanente. So there's like the insured, and then there's the Medi-Cal and the uninsured, and yet we continue to make sure that, do everything we can to make sure that they have access. Where we are right now with the state, with the budget, first of all, there was the check write delay, which was already legislated, and then there's the delay in adopting a budget. So since the beginning of this month, we already have not been paid for service we have rendered $390,000. And so for us to be able to absorb that, to get to when we are going to be paid what we're owed, is a huge sacrifice. We serve about 25,000 people a year. Just in our health center alone, we have 16 sites. We have dental optometry. We have a comprehensive array of services. And we have 170 employees. And in the month of August, we have 3 payrolls. So the part that is concerning me in particular right now is the appearance when I come to Sacramento and other places that I've gone to recently, where it's become normal for there to be no budget. That this is the 6 out of 7 years in a row that there has been no budget. Yet the Constitution of the state of California very clearly says July 1st, a budget.
Thank you, Joel. So what we end up with is budgets that aren't on time, budgets that aren't worth waiting for once they are delivered. I think a lot of people wonder, so what? How does that affect me in my daily life? Well, what happens is that your local school can't really plan for what's going to be happening in the academic year. From the perspective of investment in California, it chills investment because it's hard for the private sector to plan and understand what's going to be going on. It ends up disrupting the delivery of basic services in our communities. Now, once again, what was able to happen to solve this problem, at least in part, is that last November, we, the voters of the state of California, got together. We put a measure on the ballot which said that California is going to join the other 47 states in the United States that require the majority to actually govern. We were one of only 3 states in the nation that required a 2/3 vote in order to adopt a budget. That assured that we would have 2 things wrong with our budget all the time. It would be late and it would be distorted. Now, we have joined the other 47 states in the nation and said the majority party has an obligation now to get a budget on time and a budget that reflects the values of California. Let's listen to more of Lupe's thoughts now on working together and taking personal responsibility for fixing what ails our state.
Someone once told me, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I think that that's absolutely true. I think that there's different ways to be at the table. And oftentimes we think that being at the table is being a political insider. And we think that being at the table is when we talk to the governor, when we can pick up the phone and call the governor directly on his cell phone, or when we can pick up the phone and call the Secretary of State and talk to them. Well, that's absolutely right. That's one definition of being at the table, but there's different ways for normal individual Californians to be at the table. For example, for myself, being the executive director of the Health Professions Education Foundation, I am making statewide policies. I'm not a legislator. I'm not the governor. I wasn't elected, but in essence, as the executive director of a public entity, I am responsible for ensuring not only the fiscal soundness, but I am responsible for ensuring that the right people get the right educational support in order to live out their dreams and in order to help underserved communities.
Thank you, Lupe. I think we can all agree with Lupe that it is important for us to each take personal responsibility for more involvement in our communities and our electoral process. One of the legitimate criticisms about why California's governance process is so difficult is because of the partisanship that has arisen in Sacramento. One of the ways to solve that gridlock that comes from partisanship is by opening up the electoral process to more folks. The fastest growing party in California is no party at all. It's those voters who register as declined to state. Yet those same voters have been frozen out of the primary election process. So California Forward, together with a number of other folks who support more participation in our electoral process, supported the open primary measure that was on the ballot last year. That open primary measure passed. And that means we're going to have much more participation by many more voters in the electoral process. And that can only be a good thing for the democracy here in California. Let's hear from a couple of more Californians who've been thinking about where we go from here.
If you were to pick one thing that you would fix in the sort of California governing system, these areas we're talking about, to fix in the next 5 years, what would it be?
Term limits has really been detrimental to the institutional knowledge and the collegiality that was once in Sacramento.
I'd eliminate the ability for initiative gatherers to have paid initiative gatherers out there.
Changing the 2/3 rules for the adoption of a budget and also for raising revenues.
Is incremental reform through the initiative process a process that can get us to a comprehensive reform.
Currently, incremental change of that kind is the only thing that's available to us.
A lot of what's in the current system came in through the initiative process, multiple initiatives over time, and multiple constitutional amendments adopted by the voters, and the legislature can't change that.
Very much a sad commentary that there is no trust. There's only allegiance to your caucus, and it's gotten too much like Washington, D.C.
Restoring accountability to the budget vote, to passing a budget, is just too important of an opportunity to miss.
I think the simple majority budget alone, this is the time to do it. If we're going to reform these things and get some common sense in the budgeting process and some real fiscal responsibility, I think it has to be a comprehensive approach to the issue.
This state is full of entities that are engaged in providing services to people who desperately depend on those services, who have not had a dime from the state of California in 4 months.
Would a state-local realignment, and I think what most people are talking about is something that gives more power to locals, different definitions how you do it, would that make government more effective?
I think what it does is it makes government more accountable.
After many, many years, we're at a point where there is a complete disconnect between local and regional level responsibility and delivery of services and revenue.
We need to return more control over the say of how funds are managed and controlled to the local officials that are closest to home.
If you gave more power to these local governments, which might be scary, you know, when you think of something like Bell to raise revenues, might you get greater accountability because it scares people into being engaged in their local government?
What I would like to see is more revenue generating capacity, generally more decision making at the local level, but also with an understanding that there are vulnerable constituencies that just can't be left to the mercy of local political establishments that may have absolutely no concern whatsoever for their needs or survival.
What are a few, maybe even one, effective way to get the kind of community engagement you need on this issue?
If you question for a moment whether your elected representative in the Senate or the Assembly cares what you think, they care. So please communicate with them and let them know when there are things that you want them to do.
You pick the kind of organization you're comfortable with, neighborhood organization, business organization, labor organization, arts organization, whatever you like, but it is through your organizational framework, getting it more energized, getting it more involved, getting it more concerned about reform, getting it more concerned about tax and revenue issues, getting it more concerned about whatever you care about, that has to be the basis of forming constituencies that are going to make change.
For those of us who are deeply interested, and I assume we're deeply interested because we got up early on a Saturday morning to be here, that we take that and we share it with other people once we've left here. And spending 15 minutes a day sharing our passion with others for civic engagement will indeed make a difference.
Thank you so much for joining us today in this discussion about how to modernize the tools of governance in California. We've had an opportunity to take a look at what the challenges are, what some of the solutions are that Californians using the ballot have been able to put in place to help fix some of our really broken problems. But we also know that there's a number of issues that still need to be addressed. California Forward is going to be undertaking a large community outreach program throughout the state of California this spring and this summer. There's going to be meetings all over the state of California in communities large and small. We're going to be having a community dialogue here in the Monterey Bay area. Go to californiaforward.org and take a look at our link to Speak Up California. That's the name of the project. It's a project that tries to build on the good work that we've all done as Californians so far in the last couple of years to be able to modernize the tools of governance. I want to thank Community Television of Santa Cruz, also the folks at California Forward who work so hard every day, our funders in the major foundations in California, and mostly you, for caring enough about your community and your state to participate in making it even better.